Chapter 141, The Plan. Professor Snape was a world apart from Professor McGonagall. When Chien made a mistake in Transfiguration, McGonagall would gently correct him and let him try the proper procedure. Snape, by contrast, would sneer, force him to state the wrong answer, and then slip the right one in among a torrent of ridicule. Chien, who had been expecting this, quickly jotted down the concealed phrase. Snape stopped lecturing, the cauldron's flames died, and the scarf around Chien's neck, like a little shield, kept the dungeon's chill at bay so he could focus on the parchment. Snape stared at him, eyes cold, then at the page filled with the fusion enlightenment method. It was an absolutely precious piece of knowledge, something any potions master would covet. He had never imagined anyone would be foolish enough to write it down and show it in class. Seeing it now churned something ugly and unsettled across his impassive features. "You shouldn't tell anyone, Chien," he hissed under his breath, then almost grudgingly, "but it's not bad, a rather excellent method." Chien, tired, almost thought he had misheard. He murmured, "What did you say, Professor?" Snape's face snapped. "Ridiculous. Ow! Immediately. Chien, take your stupid tools and get out!" He exploded. Chien was practically thrown from the classroom. At the dungeon's mouth, 10 galleons were hurled and landed in his hand. He staggered into the corridor and kept moving, silently promising himself he would never speak while exhausted again. Loud laughter echoed down the corridor. Sir Cadogan, clutching his sides, roared with mirth. "Oh, little green, I must tell this one." He laughed until tears ran down his face, oblivious to the fact that Chien had already reached the end of the passage. Chien turned to the fat lady, who had moved to the portrait frame. The knight in the painting was always a little too bold, riding a pony to knock down Headmaster Black, punching and kicking him, openly mocking Professor Snape at the dungeon's entrance. Listening to the continued screaming from the doorway, Chien let his gaze linger there for a moment. "Oh, my foolish knight, I hope he knows to run farther in heaven," the fat lady said, wiping a tear and covering her face. Chien paused. She had been watching him when he wasn't looking. He hadn't expected the knight to be in such a state. "Fat lady, you scared little green," he said softly. Madame Violet stepped over from another portrait, holding a plate of fruit, and tried to comfort her. Chien saw that the fat lady hadn't really been crying. She had just smeared water on her cheeks for effect. He left without another word. "All right, are you satisfied now?" Madame Violet said sharply, shoving an apple into the fat lady's mouth. "Here, this should shut you up." In the Great Hall, Hermione was arguing with Harry and Ron as they arrived. "I noticed something about Professor Snape before," Harry said to Hermione. "On Halloween, he tried to get past that three-headed dog. It bit him. We think he was trying to steal whatever the dog was guarding. The dog, Fluffy, is Hagrid's. Hagrid got him last year from a Greek fellow in a pub. Hagrid lent him to Dumbledore to guard something very precious." "Yes, Hermione, don't you get it yet?" Ron added. "During the Quidditch match, he was up to no good too. He was messing with Harry's broom, trying to make him fall to his death." "That wasn't Professor Snape," Hermione snapped. "He wasn't the one casting the spell." "Honestly, Hermione, you always think all teachers are saints," Ron said, exasperated. "If you don't believe me, you can ask Chien," Harry blurted. Hermione stamped her foot, furious. The three of them drifted apart slightly. "Of course we could ask Chien. He'll agree with me. Chien knows him better than we do," she muttered defensively. Nearby, at the Gryffindor table piled with puddings, Chien was eating while Justin and Hermione watched Harry and Ron whispering to each other. Justin smiled gently, then both of them looked at Chien as he flipped through a notebook that sent a few harmless fireworks popping out every time he turned a page. The Weasleys had left him quite a few surprises. "What do you think, Hermione? Will Chien agree?" Justin asked. He glanced at Chien's cheerful, unconcerned face. "Besides being a bit foolish, what do you think of them?" Hermione sighed. "Two idiots," she said at last. "Don't worry, Hermione. Give them some time. Not everyone is born standing in the sunlight," Justin replied, smiling to reassure her, though his eyes were a little distant, not on Harry and Ron. He had learned from his mother that people carried many hidden strengths. Harry might be an orphan, but he had a family who cared for him and kept him warm. Ron might be poor among many siblings, but he had laughter and parcels from home. Money and happiness didn't always walk hand in hand. A faint flicker of fire still gleamed in Justin's eyes as the hearth blazed. Outside, heavy snow swirled and hid the harsh landscape. His voice softened and drifted like the wind in the snow. Hermione, you know. Unlike them, some people are brave and silent all the time, and we forget how much they endure. Chapter 142, New Members. The Gryffindor table was nearly full. Harry and Ron sat elbow to elbow, spearing whatever they could with their forks, bread, flatbreads, mushrooms, while arguing over plans to improve their chances at whatever problem had cropped up again. Most of the schemes were impractical, but it was fun to talk them through. Ron had also started teaching Harry wizard's chess. It was like Muggle chess, except the pieces were alive, which made playing feel more like commanding an army. Ron's set was battered and old, one of the many hand-me-downs in his family, his grandfather's, but he knew every piece so well they obeyed him without question. Harry was using the set Seamus Finnegan had left him. The pieces didn't trust him at all. They quarreled constantly and offered contradictory advice until Harry's head hurt. "Don't send me there. Can't you see your knight? Send him. Sacrifice him. That's what you should do. The knight won't do." Harry rubbed his temples and sent the noisy pieces away. On the table around them lay books. Great Wizards of the 20th Century, Directory of Famous Contemporary Wizards, Major Discoveries in Modern Magic, Studies on the Development of Recent Wizardry. So many reference books that it looked as if they were searching for someone. Inevitably, Harry lost the game. He and Ron exchanged a look. They both knew what that meant. The troublesome problem that had been dangling over them again would have to be faced. "There must be some kind of test," Ron said, trying to sound confident. "Remember the Blind Alley Club? Fred and his lot set it up, called it the Castle Explorers Club, but it was really to sneak through secret passages. Their test was to run into a wall with their eyes shut. Nobody ever knew if a secret passage was behind it. Everyone who went on said it was terrifying." Harry remembered Fred and the others, winking at him outside the changing room. "If you don't shut your eyes and run into it, you'll never find the passage." Determination flashed across Harry's face. "We'll pass the test." He thought about what could possibly be worse than endless homework. Professor McGonagall's sharp criticism of their Transfiguration essays and Professor Snape's cold deduction of 5 points. If it went on, Gryffindor's house points would disappear completely. He and Ron looked at each other and saw the same resolve. Hermione watched them approaching, all business. They cut across the great hall and quietly hid behind a suit of armor by the entrance, waiting for something to happen. The hourglasses of the 4 houses sat under the staff table. Ravenclaw was holding first place after its ups and downs. Ron sighed. "If we don't win the Quidditch Cup, we'll never catch Ravenclaw. Nor will Slytherin," Harry added, trying to lift his friend's spirits. By the time the puddings arrived and were polished off, Harry and Ron were still crouched by the armor. Chien, sitting with a book called The Fifth Element, an exploration, was just leaving the Great Hall for Hope Cottage when he noticed the two of them skulking about. "Harry? Ron?" he called softly. They'd been around often enough that Chien recognized them immediately. "Oh, Chien! We want to join the test, whatever organization it is." "We," Ron began. Harry froze at the unexpected voice. Ron's face registered instant despair. Chien looked between them and understood straight away. He didn't object. If everyone in Hope Cottage agreed, he wouldn't mind. Having Harry and Ron around might even be useful for keeping an ear on news about you-know-who. "Ah, so you mean there's no actual test? Not something like running into a wall?" Ron blurted out, horrified at how nonsensical he'd sounded. Chien raised an eyebrow, amused. "Oh, you mean you'll go and ask right away?" Harry clapped a hand over Ron's mouth and dragged him away. "Ron, why did you say we had to run into a wall?" Ron, cheeks flushed and embarrassed at how he'd babbled in front of Chien, tried to recover his composure. The two of them couldn't help laughing at themselves. The next morning, Hope Cottage. Chien sat by the fireplace, sorting his notes. He'd added a lot of material on potions and defense against the dark arts, and when he put things into the wooden cabinet by the door, the enchanted mirror hanging there muttered, "Neat, clean. But the style's a mess." Chien glanced down at his outfit. Scarf, sweater, gloves, robes, hat, all mismatched, and smiled at the mirror's bluntness. He went back to an alchemy book. He was due to visit Professor Terra in the afternoon. A ruckus outside announced the arrival of Harry and the others. "Mr. Finch-Fletchley, do we really not have to do anything?" Harry's voice called. "Oh, yes, we don't mind," Ron replied, sounding eager. "Do you think this place is some kind of man-eating den?" Hermione added, exasperated and amused. Justin Finch-Fletchley greeted them warmly from the doorway. Then Harry noticed a painted owl on the wall wearing gold-rimmed glasses. "It's so magical," Ron breathed, staring. "Young wizards, more foolish young wizards, answer my question," the painted owl exclaimed in a shrill, officious voice. The owl did not flap its wings, it simply peered down at them. Ron jumped back as though he'd been pushed. "The owl in the painting, it talks?" he blurted. The portraits at Hogwarts were the most convincing examples of realism anyone had ever seen. They held the memories and temperaments of their subjects so completely that they behaved like people, moving between frames, chatting with the living, raising a glass, singing at the top of their lungs, or shrieking. None of them, however, ever turned into an animal. Yet Ron's face went white when an owl in a portrait suddenly started quizzing them. "Young wizard, stupid young wizard, enemy of the snake, who is it?" the owl demanded. Harry and Ron were more surprised to see Hermione and Justin actually take the question seriously. They thought and muttered until a slip of parchment slid quietly from under the door. Justin picked it up and read aloud. "It's the stag, the deer. In symbolism, the deer drives the snake from its hole and kills it." The owl wore an expression that was almost human disdain. Borrowed wisdom is wisdom too, but always borrowing. It never finished. The owl stiffened, went perfectly still, and a hidden door clicked open. Harry and Ron exchanged a look. Like the strange knocker at Ravenclaw, this was a test. No wonder no one had ever found this secret group, a whole base guarded by a portrait owl. They were excited and a bit nervous. "Mr. Finch-Fletchley, what if we can't answer?" Ron asked, an edge of caution in his voice. Justin grinned. "It's fine. You can still come in, even if you can't answer." "Then what were we doing just now?" Harry blurted. "Don't you think answering questions is fun?" Hermione said, chin tilted in that way of hers. Harry and Ron shook their heads like a couple of startled birds. They went through the door and into a classroom almost as large as the Gryffindor common room. 2 wooden tables stood beside a crackling fireplace. Rugs and cozy pumpkin lanterns were scattered around. Plants were tidy and plentiful. Candles floated in midair. In the center of the room was a soft sofa and several small tables, each with movable wooden panels, an alchemical touch. As they watched, one panel eased itself downward. Chien stepped out, smiling and nodding. Harry and Ron nodded back, still wondering how Hogwarts could hide such a room from them. A voice snapped at them from somewhere nearby. "Button up your coats. They're all crooked, like deep-fried strips of dough." Harry spun to look and realized he was staring at a mirror that reminded him of the one on the burrow's mantelpiece, an alchemical mirror of a sort. Ron whispered that it was the same kind, and Harry felt as if nothing at Hogwarts would surprise him anymore, short of Professor Snape emerging from a wardrobe. "Harry, Ron," Neville came trotting up, scissors in hand. "So glad to see you here. I wanted to tell you for ages, but I didn't dare." Harry felt genuinely touched. Neville's shyness and relief were easy to understand. Who wouldn't want to keep a place like this to themselves? Well, they had already let Ron and Hermione in, and Chien and Justin, and now Neville with them. Ron chuckled and said, half in jest, "All right, I'm ready to receive the wondrous magic." "What is receiving the wondrous magic?" Hermione asked, baffled. "It's the spell Chien used to make Neville cleverer," Ron whispered, ashamed and excited at once. Justin laughed and slapped his forehead. "Really? Idiots!" Hermione looked both exasperated and amused. Harry hurried to explain. "Neville worked hard. We, and mainly Chien, just helped a bit." Justin sobered and pointed to a wooden shelf by the entrance. When Ron looked, his eyes lit up. Dozens of thick green notebooks filled the shelf, more of them than he'd ever expected. Ron had never thought a book could be better for its thickness, but these were different. They were clear and easy to understand. "You can write questions on the parchment at the back of the notes," Justin said. "Chien writes the answers in the morning. The green notes will solve most of your problems. For herbology, ask me or Neville. For spells and transfiguration, ask Hermione. If you still can't figure it out, you can ask Chien when we go to the Great Hall. Also, find a time to have Chien test your spell proficiency. Pick a moment when he isn't busy and is in a good mood. He emphasized that last part with a smile that made everyone a little wary. Any other questions? Justin asked. Harry and Ron were still stunned. They shook their heads at the same time. Justin waved a hand and 2 more wooden tables appeared. Justin had clearly prepared the room for them. Steam curled from cups of honey lemon tea on their desks. The green notes were stacked in the cabinet, and a little log table groaned under the weight of desserts. The 3 of them exchanged glances, eyes shining. This was brilliant. After a while, they noticed a small sign behind the door, the Gifted Hope Room. The name made more sense than any of them could explain. When dinner time came, Harry and Ron leaned toward Justin. Mr. Finch-Fletchley, what do we call our club? Are there rules? Justin hesitated. Among them, Chien and he were practically a given. Hermione was independent, Neville was honest and timid. No one was likely to drag people in without permission or blab the location. Still, it seemed like something to decide. We should discuss it. Everyone, Justin called. Chien had already left the room. Isn't Chien part of it? Harry asked. Puzzled, Justin shrugged. Chien isn't bound by rules. He does what he wants. Hermione rolled her eyes. Neville nodded shyly and enthusiastically. To all dear readers, tomorrow, 3 updates at 10 a.m. and 3 updates at 10 p.m. 144, 2 nights. For a long time, Chien hadn't seen Sir Cadogan. He wandered the castle out of habit, moving through corridors he never usually visited. A faint worry drove him farther than usual. Little Green, make the stop his mouth, came the fat lady's exasperated whisper from her portrait. Lady Violet, dressed in white, appeared in the rice field painting and greeted him. Lady Violet, Chien replied politely, then listened, a little nervous, as she recounted Sir Cadogan's glorious exploits over the past few days. He had been trapped in a corridor portrait, chattering without rest. No one had seen him for 3 days, only occasional bursts of poetic verse, punctuated by screams. When Chien quietly entered the dungeons, a senior Slytherin was just finishing a potion. The student glanced anxiously at Chien and toward the deeper shadows of the dungeons a few times, then fled as if escaping. Chien found Sir Cadogan's portrait at once. The knight was tied to a wooden stake, a pile of trolls clustering around him. If the bonfire below hadn't refused to take, Chien suspected the next sight of the Sir would have been inside a troll's belly. The knight, bruised and bound, still bellowed at the top of his lungs. Last year I toasted wine. This year I watch hope triumph o'er scorn. Last year I watched the flames. This year I'm turned to shish kebab. Ah! Now I am a proud lion, gazing up, lost utterly in the cradle of hope. A handful of ladies followed Chien. They tossed meat to distract the trolls and then, with great effort, dragged Sir Cadogan free. Sir, quiet down. Do it for me. That's an order. Lady Violet ground out through clenched teeth. Of course, my lady. Knight's Code, Article 4. Always offer aid to ladies, the Sir replied, softer now but still chanting like a spell. That stubborn donkey stuck in the mud. Listen to me. For now, stop grieving. Hear the blessings scatter their petals round you. A jar shattered somewhere deep in the dungeons, and the Sir suddenly panicked. Lady, hurry! Hurry! Lady Violet couldn't help laughing, and the fat lady shoved an apple into the Sir's mouth to keep him quiet. She shoved another apple into her own mouth and mumbled between bites. Little Green, you're always willing to forgive a fat lady with an apple in her mouth, aren't you? Chien answered gravely. Yes, madam, I trust you. Oh, child. The fat lady's eyes glistened. By the time they left the dungeons, Chien didn't press Sir Cadogan about why he had been singing for days. He only said, Sir, you've done enough. The Sir, swollen and grimacing, said nothing. It wasn't until Chien hurried to the alchemy office that the knight mumbled under his breath. What a fine chance, 2 children with noble knightly qualities, oh loyalty and courage. Snow began to fall as Chien climbed the stairs. He didn't notice a slim strip of parchment drift from the dungeons toward a warm palm and settle between Professor Terra's fingers. The parchment bore a name, Chien Green. Professor Terra studied it. Among all the first years he stood out, favored by several professors, including the potions master. It made sense. An alchemy master is familiar with many branches of magic, and that breadth is how alchemy reveals its mysteries. But this child seemed exceptional. Professor Terra hadn't seen such a talented, humble, and practical pupil in a long time. Sticking it out in the greenhouse for months in harsh Scottish weather was no small thing. Her calm expression softened, though her confidence did not. Alchemy could change the world, a miracle among branches of magic, yet even that felt like only the beginning. At the same time, in Hope Cottage, a small group gathered by the fireplace. Justin's voice mingled with the crackle of burning wood and soft breathing. Hope Cottage is a hidden place. Mr. Owl won't allow outsiders in, and we can't bring trouble here. If someone wants to introduce a new member, everyone must agree. This room is a gift, meant to nurture and keep hope. If you want to fool around, take it to the common room. He rattled off the rules crisply, and everyone accepted them. Harry and Ron felt, in that moment, that they had truly been let in. They listened closely, not daring to miss a word. If a member of Hope Cottage gets into trouble, help if you can. Even if it's a mistake, we'll see it through together. Justin's words stirred something in the group. He continued, "Inside the cottage, trust your companions." They all fell silent. Then Justin's light blue eyes showed a balance of gentleness and resolve. "We are partners," he said. "When a partner makes a decision or says or does something in this room that we don't understand, our duty is to support them. That's what partners are for." When he said that, Harry and Ron felt as if they'd been given a great gift. In this room, they were trusted completely. Hermione and Neville looked taken aback. Hermione felt uneasy. She trusted Xian and Justin, perhaps Neville, but she wasn't sure about Harry and Ron, until she recalled the two who had burst out the door on Halloween night. That memory made it easier to accept them now. "My mother told me once," Justin murmured, and his words landed heavy in the room. "If trust isn't whole, then it's no trust at all. The cost of betrayal is high for both parties because the deceived can no longer trust their companion." The thought of that cost steeled Harry and Ron. They would face a troll rather than pay it. The meeting did not linger long. Xian climbed the spiral staircase as snow swallowed the castle outside. Back in the cottage, a rustle went through those who had faced a troll together. Their breaths matched the beat of each other's hearts. Justin took from his pocket a well-preserved note, his mother's handwriting still clear. "My child, trust is a house with countless windows. Its rooms are like cedar, its sloping sky an everlasting roof, its visitors the noblest. Its purpose is this: with your small hands, gather heaven." Chapter 145, Ritual Magic Alchemy, was more surprising and more intriguing than Xian had imagined. Professor Terra had promised him an afternoon and was strict enough to count class time as part of it. She led him into the alchemy classroom. The others were too busy with their assignments to notice an extra young wizard. Only then did Xian look around properly. The room was full of instruments, and only a few students were present, mostly Ravenclaws and Hufflepuffs, a smattering of Gryffindors and Slytherins. As Professor Terra taught, she had Xian watch the whole process, from preparing the materials to engraving the magic script and infusing it with power. Only a few students managed to produce a howler. Professor Terra's expression was no kinder than the faces of those who had failed. "Before you learn, watch the whole process," she said. "It's like setting the course for a sailboat." Ignoring the departing seniors, she turned to him, hands folded behind her back. Her standards were harsher than those of the students who had only a vague familiarity with the craft. "Alchemy is a noble, ancient art," she began. "It has always pursued boundless wealth and the perfection of the soul in secret. Its secrets will only be revealed to wizards who truly possess talent." She held up a notebook, blank. "You have 1 week to record the material selection for the howler. Remember, Mr. Green, slow is fast." She handed him several books, clearly chosen, some passages obscured by Confundus charms, leaving only the most precise parts. She seemed well aware of how alchemists shrouded their records. "It's not always that alchemists want to be obscure for the sake of it," she said. "Remember the 3 stages of alchemy: selecting and melting materials, transforming and sublimating metals, and engraving and transforming with magic script." She smiled as if she had seen his thoughts. "Throughout wizarding history, alchemists have tried to turn base metal into gold. They treat the world as if it has life and spirit. With the right knowledge and tools, those forces can be guided. Through this noble art, metals can live, die, and be reborn. Xian left the classroom quietly, thinking it through. He had a practical grasp of the three stages: selection, transformation, and the sublimation that comes from engraving runes. Professor Terra's task placed him in the blackening stage, picking materials and purging impurities. She refused to let him look up the exact materials used for the howler, telling him only, "Before you choose, think more, Mr. Green, think more." So he concentrated on the books she had given him. They listed dozens of possible reagents without resorting to the usual talk of elements, planets, or the Philosopher's Stone, just practical descriptions of materials, which gave Xian plenty to explore. Alchemy, he discovered, was vast. Professor Terra warned him not to be superficial. Follow your intuition and seek how alchemy speaks to a wizard's understanding. For days, whenever the young wizards in Hope Cottage saw him, Xian was bent over comparisons between samples, testing textures and reactions. He devoured Professor Terra's books, and by the end of the week, felt he had an answer. On Monday, a cold wind gusting through the hall, Professor Terra sat facing him and asked, with a hint of curiosity, "5 days, Mr. Green. Have you gained any insight?" "Alchemy development says wizards have studied alchemy almost as long as muggles," he replied, speaking partly to himself. "So why have only wizards ever made the Philosopher's Stone?" His eyes shone as he spoke. "Because alchemy, like potion making, shares a common origin that ultimately belongs to magic. The right knowledge and tools are necessary, yes, but they're only keys. What the ritual really tests is the wizard's spiritual power. History, knowledge, and the symbolism of materials all serve to strengthen that will. As the fifth element, exploration, puts it, alchemy succeeds when the wizard's magic succeeds. The creation does not act on its own. The wizard must believe it will work." Professor Terra's expression shifted. She rose quickly. "Child, I want to see you in the alchemy office 3 days a week." In 5 days, Xian understood why Professor Terra dismissed Muggle science as merely interesting. Alchemy required a mystical component. Without it, success was extraordinarily difficult. If a wizard did not believe in the ritual would not answer. It was not enough to know the components. One had to be able to conjure the will to bind them. Her assignment seemed both to continue and to have been completed at once when she taught him a small but decisive charm, the Scarpin Revealing Charm. Invented by Scarpin to identify potion ingredients, it could be, when applied thoughtfully, just as useful in alchemy. Professor Slughorn had mentioned it in 6th-year potions. Only Hermione had really grasped it. "Small tools, Mr. Green, essential tools," Professor Terra said, looking at him with barely contained approval. She expected him to pick the charm up quickly. Instead, he stalled. The student who seemed born for alchemy was baffled by that one minor spell. She frowned. "Same time tomorrow, Mr. Green. I'll reserve an afternoon for you." She left him standing there, perplexed. Xian felt as confused. Tomorrow, he had to be in the dungeons brewing potions. The elixir of euphoria was only 10 proficiency points from beginner level, and reaching it would unlock new potion talents and officially open a door into alchemy. Now 2 doors were colliding, and he couldn't imagine what would pour out if he opened only one. As he walked down the corridor, half lost in thought, Michael and Terry passed by. Michael, handful of returned notes, brightened at the sight of him. "Oh, Xian, I knew you'd be here. I'm returning your charms notes." Scarpin Revealing Charm? You're not going to count windows with it, are you?" "Windows are important," Michael declared. Terry, cheeks reddening, shot back a retort as they all laughed and moved on, leaving Xian to decide which doorway to push open first. Chapter 146, Scarpin Revealing Charm. "Let's just assume it's important." Michael stared at Xian in disbelief. "Xian, promise me, 1 Ravenclaw counting windows is enough." Xian was thoughtful for a moment, then his eyes brightened. "Terry, may I ask?" Yes, Terry cut in. "He's mastered the Scarpin Revealing Charm to the non-verbal level, so he spends all day studying the different materials on those windows. Can you believe it? Sometimes the rain isn't even made of the same stuff." Michael replied helplessly. "Sometimes the rain is just different." Terry protested. "Oh, okay." Michael humored him. Xian's lips curved slightly. It looked as if he had found a way in. Before December, Hogwarts had been hit by wind and sleet, but the Great Hall's warm fires and thick walls always made the students feel safe. As Chien and Terry talked about the Scarpin revealing charm, Chien discovered that this particular Ravenclaw was shy and modest. He researched odd, specific questions, but never boasted about them. It turned out the castle's windows really were constructed of different materials, and Terry went on to insist, wide-eyed, "Oh, Chien, don't laugh at me, but I think the castle is alive." He glanced at Chien cautiously, waiting for laughter or a puzzled look. "I believe it," Chien nodded. "I'm certainly not joking." "Oh no, you believe it?" Terry whispered, astonished. "Why wouldn't I believe it?" There was an earnestness to Chien's words. "If you believe that, then you must have noticed how the arrangement of tables in the Great Hall shifts, that it doesn't stay the same across the room. Other rooms change too, their sizes and shapes rearrange." He rattled off a string of observations, surprised at himself. Chien nodded thoughtfully. He had noticed subtle differences in the potions classroom down in the dungeons. The castle felt different to him there. If the castle had a sort of awareness, after all, it once sealed Umbridge out of the headmaster's office, then constant change seemed plausible. Terry grew excited and talked on without stopping, while Chien listened carefully. After a while, Terry flushed with embarrassment. He'd been talking only about himself. Taking advantage of the moment, he slowly and deliberately explained the tricks he'd used to learn the Scarpin revealing charm. Chien picked up the incantations and gestures, and before leaving the Great Hall, successfully completed an apprentice-level practice. Justin watched from the side, unable to look away. On one hand, Chien was listening to a Ravenclaw expound on the castle. Justin leaned in. He, too, was curious about Hogwarts. On the other hand, Harry and Ron were showing Seamus their progress. Harry demonstrated a levitation charm that could make fruit float and an aguamenti that produced a thin stream of water. Ron lagged a little, but Professor Flitwick had recently encouraged him and even awarded an extra point, so Ron was unusually buoyant. "Oh, how far have you gotten with your spells? You don't know? Ah, that's too bad," Ron teased, half proud, despite only having a pitiful apprentice-level levitation and a beginner-level lumos. He had never expected learning spells to feel so tangible. He had always imagined lessons were vague. The professors taught, tests happened, and a score was handed down just enough to limp by. Seamus pressed him about what progress meant. Ron pretended to be deep and spouted a lot of nonsense. Young wizards this age loved to show off. Although nothing more about Hope Cottage had been revealed, Chien sensed the glances around him had grown more eager. As he was leaving the Great Hall, a flushed Seamus approached, clearly nervous, but apparently egged on by someone. "Great Chien, can you make me smarter?" "Oh, I don't ask for much, just so my wand doesn't explode," he blurted. Chien smiled inwardly. Surrounded by what felt like 3 Weasleys at once, he addressed the explosion-prone Seamus softly. "Everyone has their own strengths, Mr. Finnegan. Perhaps you just haven't found a way to use yours yet." Later, in Hope Cottage, Chien set a glass cabinet he'd transfigured on his desk to store the dozens of materials Professor Tara had given him. You practiced the Scarpin revealing charm at an apprentice level. You practiced the Scarpin revealing charm at an apprentice level. You practiced the Scarpin revealing charm at an apprentice level, Proficiency 1. With continuous practice, the Scarpin revealing charm unlocked quickly. Chien left Hope Cottage, waved his wand, and a piece of parchment turned into an owl that flew toward Professor Tara's office. The professor might not receive it immediately, but the owl would wait for several days. Chien had used Transfiguration because Professor Tara encouraged communicating through various transfigurations, especially the more whimsical ones. Unlike the warmth of the Great Hall, the dungeons in winter were only warmed by cauldrons. Severus Snape stood motionless in the cold like a black silhouette against the draught. His fingertips rested on a parchment at the wooden table, its edges curled slightly from the cauldron's heat. He alone knew what was written there. His gaze pierced the flickering flames, but fixed on nothing tangible, only the hollow depths of a cold memory. After a long silence, a cauldron bubbled and broke with a sudden noise, like a thought that appeared and was quickly swallowed. He did not move. All the chill of November seemed to have settled in his dark eyes. Beside the parchment lay a small list, and next to a certain name it read Guardian, none. That incessant voice still seemed to echo in his ears. He told himself he could no longer tolerate that fool's idiocy. He traced with a fingertip a distant, unfamiliar place in London. Then there was a soft knock at the dungeon door. Chapter 147, A Winter Without Letters. The dungeons were alive with the clack and clatter of young wizards at work. Cauldrons gurgled and steamed, ingredients rustled as they were dropped in, and every now and then a sharp, chilling voice cut through the noise. Hidden in shadow, Severus Snape watched. From years of observation, he knew that, apart from a few oddities, the fool's technique was not unlike that of many mediocre students he had seen. He could not divine any marvelous reactions between ingredients, nor perceive the subtle adjustments that flames made on a bubbling brew. All he could really judge was precision, and if it weren't for that, the boy would probably be lying in the hospital wing. You have brewed a potion of joy at the apprentice level, proficiency +1. Without ritual magic to lean on, Xian could at best make apprentice-level potions of joy. That itself was a big improvement over the past week. He had once failed even basic brews. After several cauldrons in a row, he had to pause and rest. The gap to novice level was almost closed, but he was certain his mental stamina would not hold. He took a small potion bottle from his robe and drank it beneath Snape's intent gaze. Warmth spread through him, his wariness eased. He tucked the crystal vial away. It tasted of apple. 3 months of flight training and Snape's strict potions regimen had rebuilt his magic to roughly the level he'd been at before entering school. Where he had once exhausted himself just practicing the levitation charm, he now cast several nonverbal spells without blinking. More importantly, he felt he was on the verge of a breakthrough. His body had been producing only a trickle of magic before. Now he could feel a threshold he might cross that would restore both his body and normal magical development. Another small bottle appeared in his hand. He glanced up. Snape's face was half hidden by a parchment. He looked back at the vial. The crystal caught the dungeon light. The potion inside was darker than before. One word was written on it: drink. Xian did not hesitate. This mysterious potion number 2, was more than 10 times as potent as the last. Its taste was richer, still apple, and heat spread through him as if something inside him had begun to thaw. When he raised his wand to try Lumos, Snape's voice thundered even farther down the hallway. "Fool! Withdraw your magic." Xian quietly let his wand fall. A small smile curved his mouth. There had been more than one piece of good news. You have brewed a potion of joy at the novice level, proficiency +3. The increase in his magic level showed in everything he did. A new notification flickered in Xian's mind. A new potion domain title has been unlocked. Please check. He looked down. Title: Proficient in Potions. Greatly increases perception of potions. Greatly enhances potion talent. Wizard Xian. Potion talent: blue. Proficient in potions title applied. Original talent was white. Note: average wizards are green. Advancement: brewing 6 expert-level potions. Brewing 6 proficient-level potions will unlock the expert-level potion domain title. His talent had changed. The days of reaching desperately for inspiration, of moving so cautiously he dared barely deviate, of agonizing over heat and stirring strength, those days were receding. He allowed himself the thought that he might now be at least halfway to being a potion savant. Snape felt the change too. He had detected the surge of magic in that short space of time. The boy had nearly lit 100 invisible lanterns in the dungeons, and some sensitive ingredients had to be kept in the dark. Details clicked together in Snape's mind until astonishment replaced merely clinical interest. November's chill crept into the stone. Snow drifted along the castle's edges, whispering soft and white. Xian worked with steady hands, lighting the cauldron, preparing and adding ingredients, stirring them to fuse. Following a peculiar, sure instinct, he adjusted technique on the fly while his quill kept recording in the notebook at his elbow. Only now did he understand why Snape had been so tense and severe. His earlier attempts had been nothing but clumsy imitations. You have brewed a potion of joy at the proficient level, proficiency +10. Joy spread across Xian's face. A proficient-level potion of joy was worth, even at recycling prices, about 20 galleons. It meant he had the skill to brew advanced potions on his own. Compared to the student who had once struggled with Murtlap essence, he felt 100 times stronger. When the cold in the dungeons bit hardest, Snape stood by the narrow window and turned his gaze out over the frozen black lake. The last red coals in Xian's cauldron flared into ash and made a faint, sighing sound. Snape did not move. He watched his own breath condense into white before him, then vanish into the stagnant air. It was as if he had been waiting for something for a very long time. Perhaps he had long ago stopped remembering what he waited for. Here, where even ghosts seldom wandered, memories and the residue of potions kept certain wounds from ever healing. He had thought it was mere lack of talent that had ruined the boy, had frozen the magic and blighted the body, but now Xian's talent was emerging. Snape's mind looped on a single, reluctant thought. Hardship had starved the body, destroyed the rightful talent, and frozen what magic there was. Now it was returning. Compared to Xian's small excitement, Snape's face remained unreadable. Unusually, his voice was almost calm when he asked, in a tone that trembled more than it admitted, "Why? No resentment?" Snow fell in silence toward the Black Lake, toward the Forbidden Forest, falling into a long winter from which no letters came. The flakes thickened. The flames in the cauldron made faint, intermittent sounds as they rose. This winter lay heavy on Snape's lungs, like rust on a trachea. His voice halted like a train, the name hanging in his throat and lingering in that long, wordless season. Chapter 148, Transfiguration Biscuits. Heavy snow coated Hogwarts in a thick silver blanket, and the cold seemed to sharpen longings between people. Xian, however, had no letters. He didn't expect any to arrive. A week passed, and he spent most of his time in the dungeons, in the Transfiguration office, or in alchemy. The alchemy tab was open, but his rank had not changed. Floating Quill, Apprentice, 300. He needed 3 apprentice-level alchemical creations to qualify as an apprentice in alchemy. Like every other branch of magic, alchemy demanded simple, repeated creations before mastery could be claimed. Professor Terra had already given him 2 tasks: craft a howler and pick 1 alchemical creation of his own. The twins were keen that he choose one of their inventions. "Look at this, Peruvian instant darkness powder," Fred had shouted in the corridor yesterday afternoon, popping out from behind a painting with a small, dark sphere clutched in his hand. When he threw it, the corridor plunged into absolute, impenetrable darkness. Lumos and Incendio could not cut through it. Xian, however, could walk from the corridor into the great hall with his eyes closed, so the prank scarcely fazed him. "I told you the smell from the great hall was unfair," Fred pretended to wail. "Why do I have to pick your inventions?" Xian asked quietly, looking at the 2 of them. "How boring the usual things are," he continued. "But if you use our inventions—" Fred lit up as if he'd been waiting for exactly those words. "Then Professor Terra might even be interested," George joined in. "If Professor's interested, we can attract investors. Professor just has to say, it has potential. Then wizards from Beauxbatons and Ouagadougou will be lining up with their galleons," Fred crowed, bouncing on his heels. "You'll understand Professor Terra's reputation in the alchemy world later." In the end, Xian chose canary creams, a transfiguration food, as his practice item. Between the howler and the canary creams, he had 2 alchemical projects to finish before Christmas. That meant studying materials, fusion rituals, and the magical script arrays for both creations. Time had suddenly tightened. December arrived properly. Several feet of snow lay everywhere, and the lake had frozen solid. Xian left the castle, clutching Professor Terra's notes. Outside, a cluster of young wizards tumbled through the snow, chasing one another and laughing. Although Xian could manage broom play and jumping, he was used to staying in a quiet corner. He used a newly learned beginner-level fire charm to light dry grass in a fireproof pot, then summoned 2 small fire salamanders. They left charred marks on the snow and scurried off until their flames guttered and were buried under fresh drifts. He'd been thinking a lot about which transfiguration to focus on. Advanced transfiguration from one living creature to another was difficult, and he only had time to learn one properly for now. The animal he'd observed most carefully, and the one that made the most sense, was the magical world's messenger. The owl. Xian set down a loose, crinkled sheet of notes, waved his wand, and a flock of transfigured owls burst from his hand and rose into the gray sky. Merlin. Ron's voice trailed off in astonishment. This is normal. Xian's transfiguration progress even surpasses some older students, Justin said softly. More than some. I'd say more than most, someone else murmured. Since the Hope Cottage agreement, the 6 young wizards tended to be in the same places. Harry, Ron, Hermione, and Neville, being in Gryffindor, moved together, and their destination was usually where Justin and Xian could be found. A system prompt pulsed through Xian's awareness. You have practiced an in-depth intermediate transfiguration to expert standards. Proficiency plus 100. He heard it and knew that even an expert-level intermediate transfiguration wouldn't add enough points alone. Continuous exploration and practice in advanced transfiguration would accelerate his progress the fastest. He hadn't forgotten that the last expert-level advanced transfiguration had multiplied his proficiency tenfold. His current practical assignment was to turn living creatures into owls. Professor McGonagall had given him a batch of beetles as experimental material and had repeatedly emphasized the secrets of advanced transfiguration in her notes. While CN read, Justin and Hermione started a snowball fight nearby. Their battles were a little more magical than ordinary play. When Justin evaded the first snowball, Hermione flicked her wand and sent a stream of snowballs after him, each trailing the same spell. Justin, though proficient with the levitation charm, knew his level still lagged behind Hermione's, so he didn't try to out-levitate her. Instead, he cast Aguamenti to shape a wall of water that froze almost instantly into a clear barrier. Harry and Ron, watching, put down their snowballs, picked up their wands, and practiced levitating the snow. Each throw showed small improvements in their control. During a lull, Hermione glanced at Xian and, with a thoughtful frown, said to Justin, "My mother always said people find happiness in different ways, but true friends can share each other's joy." Xian happened to look up at that moment. He saw Harry and Ron attempt a sneak attack, and with a precise flick, Hermione turned both of them into stiff, surprised snowmen. He couldn't help the corner of his mouth lifting. Above them, real owls threaded through the gloomy sky, delivering mail and enduring winter weather. Many of them had to rest and recover under Hagrid's care before making the rounds again. "Take that, you great Gryffindor!" someone shouted as a giant snowball sailed past. One of Xian's fire salamanders puffed itself up, snatched the snowball in its mouth, and then charged straight at Fred. The twins found themselves chased in circles until they were laughing breathlessly in the snow. George laughed so hard he could barely stand when Fred misstepped and ran straight into him, both of them sent careening by the salamander's antics. "Fred, George," they called back and forth, both still grinning, their cheeks red against the white. One more chapter in half an hour. Chapter 149. I promised the Weasley twins were being punished for enchanting a volley of snowballs to chase Professor Quirrell, and one finally struck him behind his turban. Xian stared, a little bewildered. Hogwarts took aim at Lord Voldemort in more ways than Prefect Penelope's fiery reprimands. The Weasley's snowballs were another form of attack. No wonder Voldemort had singled out Hogwarts. There was a grudge a mile wide. While Professor Sprout hauled the twins away with an expression somewhere between exasperation and fondness, Xian walked toward the castle. He had done all his preparations. Now what remained was practice. A cold wind swept the corridor, and the fire in the Transfiguration office burned low. Professor McGonagall stood by the window, knuckles white around a folded letter, staring as if at a different winter. The firelight flickered across her square spectacles and left a shadow in her deep, private eyes. She set the letter down with deliberately slow hands, as if merely tidying papers. Outside, the Hogwarts grounds were a sheet of snow. A gentle knock sounded on the door. "Come in, child," McGonagall said. Xian sat and set to work. Advanced Transfiguration was dangerous and intricate. It had to be practiced under safe conditions. He kept Professor McGonagall's instructions in mind and began. He waved his wand and watched the beetle grow feathers in stages: specific, clear intent, firm belief, sufficient will. The 3 rules of Advanced Transfiguration. The beetle swelled then, in less than 2 seconds, snapped back to its original form. Ian panted, staring at it, confusion written on his face. "Young man," Professor McGonagall said, She rarely saw anyone look so puzzled. At that moment, he looked almost 11. Think, why a beetle? Her eyes narrowed, then softened as if she remembered something and fell quiet. Why? A beetle? Xian murmured to himself. Then his eyes brightened and he rifled through the professor's notes. They contained a line he'd missed. When using advanced transfiguration, one can always strengthen belief by finding the corresponding part. Below it were examples: a frog to a toad, a canary to a cuckoo, both living-to-living transformations made easier because of the similar parts they shared. Something clicked. He thought of that boy who had transfigured his companion into a badger. Had he really believed his friend was a badger? Using that logic, Xian tried again. He waved his wand, picturing not an entire alien creature but a bird that shared elements with the beetle. The insect expanded, feathers sprouting, antennae and carapace still visible, but rearranged into a large, bird-like form. It had reached apprentice standard. You have practiced advanced transfiguration to an apprentice standard, proficiency 30. You are an indisputable genius, Mr. Green, Professor McGonagall exclaimed. Xian grinned and practiced again and again. The practice panel ticked forward. Progress was progress. After a while, he reached the entry level. He was no longer making tiny concessions to the shape of things. Once he reached proficient, he could start making owl biscuits. Just before he left, Professor McGonagall walked up slowly. She took his hand, the firelight warmed her features, and she leaned close to whisper, "You will receive a letter this Christmas. I promise." Xian understood the arcane mechanics of many branches of magic well enough, but something about that promise left him oddly adrift. Outside, the snow thickened, and Professor Sprout's smile grew warmer. When spring comes next year, everything that's sleeping under the snow will be more alive than before, she said, hoe in hand, one of her favorite sayings. Xian, Justin, and Neville trudged through the drifts toward the greenhouses. Not far away, Harry was returning from training. Draco Malfoy stood in the snow, sneering. "I really feel sorry for those people," he drawled, eyes fixed on Harry. "They have to stay at Hogwarts for Christmas because their families don't want them." Crabbe and Goyle snickered. Harry ignored them and looked toward Ron, who was meeting him with Hagrid behind him. Ron had a steaming cup of hot honey and lemon tea, Justin's doing. Since the Quidditch match, Malfoy had been sullen, nursing both jealousy and wounded pride. He joked that next match a largemouth tree frog should take Harry's place as Seeker, hoping to get a laugh. Instead, everyone only admired Harry for staying on that wildly swerving broom. Jealous and angry, Malfoy turned to insult Harry's family, or lack of one. "And you, can you move? You're blocking the path," he added, his tone cold and drawn out, before turning a sneer on Ron. "Sucking up to Hagrid, Weasley? Planning to be a gamekeeper when you leave Hogwarts? Hagrid's hut must look like a palace compared to your original home." Ron lashed out. He grabbed Malfoy's shirt and charged, but Professor Snape appeared at once. "Weasley," Snape barked. Ron let go instantly. "He provoked us first, Professor," he blurted. Hagrid intervened, gruff and wide-eyed. "Malfoy just insulted their families." For a moment, everyone expected Snape to remark in his usual unfair way. He stood, grim-faced, then glanced not at them but toward the distant greenhouse, toward a pair of fleeting emerald eyes moving in that direction. A nameless rage seemed to tear through his chest. "I just said someone had no parents and was poor and ridiculous," Malfoy added, smug, oblivious to the tightness in the air. Then Snape snapped. He let out a single furious order. "Get out, all of you!" They had never seen Professor Snape so angry. The students scattered, all of them shaking with fear. As they ran, Ron turned to Harry in puzzlement. "That's strange. Did we get away with it?" he asked. Chapter 150, The Canary Cracker Crisis. Malfoy had never felt snow so cold. It chilled him to the bone and made him shiver uncontrollably. The figure under the black robes stood like a gathering storm, motionless, but with the quiet threat of thunder. Malfoy couldn't understand how this had happened. He had kept well clear of that green-eyed boy. He had even gone out of his way to avoid him. Choosing Hogwarts over Durmstrang was a decision he now bitterly regretted. His legs trembled, and when he turned his head slightly, he saw Goyle and Crabbe on the verge of fainting. That made him even more afraid. In that moment, Professor Snape's voice cut through the air like a cry from hell. "Heh, an orphan." As Harry and Ron left the Quidditch pitch, Zen, Justin, and Neville were not far away. The greenhouses and the pitch were close together, both tucked behind the castle, so when Harry and Ron looked across, they could just make out a few figures moving through the snow. "Is that Zen?" Harry asked, scarf pulled up, his breath fogging in the cold. They watched as Zen, Justin, and Neville trudged on. "If Hermione didn't have 10 more books to read, she'd be out here helping too," Ron mumbled as he and Harry walked on. He went on, recounting Snape's latest nastiness to Harry. "We barely escaped him. He'll slash points for the tiniest thing. And Neville, he's always on the receiving end. He looked dreadful today." They exchanged a look that said the same thing. The snow was thickening, and many of the greenhouse plants needed attending. The Mimbulus Mimbletonia, for instance, had pods that had to be squeezed regularly in winter. Before squeezing, the pods had to be heated over a flame until they glowed red. If they were cold when handled, the sharp, wriggling black seeds inside would explode. The plants were dangerous and difficult, but fortunately, Senior Bruce and his 2 companions usually handled the worst of it in Greenhouse 3. Zen and his friends often heard their screams, mostly Senior Bruce shouting, Senior Leon laughing. Justin reached the domed greenhouse door and pushed. Neville, shy as ever, was explaining plant care techniques to Zen, who listened with snow-dusted cheeks and scribbled notes with his Quick Notes quill. Neville beamed, flustered and pleased. "Zen! Oh, Zen!" 2 voices called as the greenhouse door opened. Harry and Ron came running up breathless. Professor Sprout pushed out of Greenhouse 3 with her usual bright smile. "How lovely! Welcome! Greenhouse 1 needs you. Gloves are on the shelf. Don't forget them." Justin smiled and gestured toward the shelves. Ron's eyes widened. "We nearly got caught by Snape. Honestly, you wouldn't believe it." Ron fumbled with his gloves, too excited to be quiet. He'd dock Gryffindor points for the tiniest thing, and Neville gets picked on all the time. Today Snape was in a rotten mood. Even Malfoy couldn't escape. Neville went pale at the mention of Snape, his voice trembling. "He hates me. He doesn't understand that. Apart from those brown-nosing Slytherins, no one really likes him." Harry set his jaw. Justin frowned. From what Justin had seen, Professor Snape was harsh but a capable teacher. Still, his sharp behavior left everyone uneasy. None of them noticed the black-robed figure standing in the distance, watching from the snowy gloom, those dark eyes fixed on the gathered students. After a sinister glance at Harry and Ron, they rested on the green-eyed boy and lingered. "He's just not a nice person," Ron muttered. "He's a loner because nobody can stand him." Harry nodded, and the small group filed into the greenhouse. Zen's voice lingered in Harry's mind as he entered, soft but full of something complicated. "Harry, even if there is no place in this world for Professor Snape, what right have we to judge his soul?" Harry stopped for a heartbeat. He rarely saw eyes with so much unreadable depth. For a moment, he remembered something Hermione had once said, that it wasn't Snape who was trying to kill him. A cold shiver ran under his skin. The black-robed figure had gone. Only the empty patch of snow remained where those green eyes had watched. They looked so much alike. "All right, young gentlemen, looks like we'll finish early today." Professor Sprout clapped, cheerful as ever. She checked that everyone had gloves and warned them to take care. They were just getting ready when a commotion erupted from Greenhouse 3. "Merlin, canary crackers really turn people into canaries." Professor Sprout's smile vanished, and she hurried toward the sound. Harry and Ron exchanged a look, while Zen and his companions peered through the doorway into Greenhouse 3. Inside, vines whipped wildly. Senior Bruce, pale and panicked, was clutching a canary and darting about, trying to avoid the flailing plants. When he could no longer dodge, he flung the small bird and cried, "Peister, remember I saved your life!" The Mimbulus Mimbletonia emitted a soporific effect, and Bruce slumped, lulled to sleep. Professor Sprout scooped him up and carried him out. The canary, however, suddenly transformed into a flushed, furious Senior Peast. "What on earth happened?" Justin asked. Zen glanced at Senior Peast's hand and saw cracker crumbs. He understood at once. That idiot, while Peaster and I were restraining the Mimbulus Mimbletonia, he fed Peaster some strange cracker, huh? Senior Leon was livid. He almost never cursed Senior Bruce in front of Zen, but now his temper was unmistakable. Chapter 151, A Difficult Task. After Senior Bruce excused himself, the few people in the greenhouse fell into a stunned silence. They were faced with a difficult problem. Who would remove the Mimbleless Mimbletonia pods now? Senior Leon told them not to worry, though it wasn't clear whether he meant Senior Bruce or himself. Then the Senior Wizard sprang into action. Before the others had entered, they had seen Leon's lips bleeding and several bloody scratches along one side of his face, a grisly sight. He stood clutching a pulsating, disgusting object about the size of a grapefruit. It had been hard enough with everyone there. With one person gone, how were they to manage? "Time to act," Senior Leon shouted. After Senior Pister finished his short burst of anger, he peered anxiously out of the greenhouse. He and Leon took a few deep breaths and focused on the gnarled stump between them. The stump came to life at once. Long, thorny vines shot up from its top and lashed about. One wrapped itself around Leon's arm. Pister used a pair of scissors to cut it away. Leon grabbed two vines, twisted them together, and tied a knot. A small hole formed in the middle of the coiled branches. Leon plunged his arm into the hole, and it snapped shut around his elbow like a mousetrap. Pister tugged and twisted desperately until the hole opened again. Leon finally freed his arm, holding a pod similar to the one they'd retrieved earlier. Suddenly, the thorny vines retracted. The stump lay still and lifeless, like a piece of dead wood. "Ugh, I would never plant these in my garden," Leon said, pushing his protective goggles up onto his forehead, wiping sweat from his face and forcing a smile. Pister returned the smile, awkward and relieved. They still had so much more to do. Outside the door, Justin's expression hardened. "I'll go help," he said, glancing over the gathered students. He barely spared a look for Shi-En, instead letting his eyes linger on the timid Neville and the thin, frightened Harry and Ron. Among them, he was the only one who looked strong. His mother had taught him that ability brings responsibility. Harry opened his mouth to say something, but no words came. Inside the greenhouse, Leon seemed to sense their hesitation. He tossed a pod over to them. "Don't be timid. Squeeze the juice quickly. While it's fresh, the quality is best." Neville caught the pulsating pod, set it in a bowl, and started immediately. "I will go," he stammered. Ron tried to sound brave. "I think the senior wizards will hold the vines firmly, right?" His attempt at humor fell flat. Cien stepped forward and took 2 steps into greenhouse number 3. Senior Leon frowned briefly. This young wizard had always been reliable, so he didn't protest. "Be careful," Pister warned simply. While Leon and Pister caught their breath, Cien casually waved his wand. He had been itching to test the limits of his advanced transfiguration, and this was as good an opportunity as any. His wand traced a wide arc, and a giant snowman rose up from the wind and snow, nearly brushing the greenhouse roof. A soft chime in Cien's head announced, "You practiced advanced transfiguration to an expert standard, proficiency plus 1,000. "Merlin!" Leon exclaimed, craning his neck up until he could see only the snowman's nostrils. Pister poked the snowman's foot. It tried to kick him away, then trembled and sagged. Controlling such a large transfiguration drained willpower. Cien prodded the snowman to steady it. "Oh, sorry," Pister said, embarrassed. Ron was mid-complaint when the snowman let out a deep roar. Everyone turned back into the greenhouse. The snowman had wrapped its arms around the Mimbleless Mimbletonia vines, while Leon and Pister methodically pulled pods from the plant's holes. Cien stood behind, guiding the snowman's movements with a series of subtle wand motions. The vines obeyed the snowman instead of lashing out. Suddenly, greenhouse number 3 felt unusually calm. Losing an insignificant Bruce and gaining a little green, Leon hummed happily, obviously relieved. "Don't fib, Leon," Pister teased in a rare, gentle voice as he plucked another pod. "How do you know I'm lying, Pister?" Leon trailed off, a little anxious but relieved. Outside, Justin's face changed. "Cien!" He just started toward him when the snowman collapsed with a thundering roar. Cien wasn't unscathed. He'd taken a chocolate Justin had handed him and used it to steady himself. But he was fine enough to sit back down and take a breath. "Where did that snowman even come from?" Ron muttered, stunned. He looked at Cien, then at the snowman, and felt a gulf between them greater than the difference between wizard and muggle. "This is real, magic," he said weakly. Harry stood silent and gaping. Neville merely scratched his head. Nothing Cien did surprised him anymore. To everyone else, it seemed that when Xian raised his wand, any problem could be solved. They went back to work as a single, efficient team. Pods were heated over flames until they were bright red, then squeezed to extract their pungent juice. Senior Leon handed over a steady stream of pods. Senior Pister helped keep the vines at bay. Neville, Ron, Harry, and Justin manned the bowls and burners, and the juice was collected and bottled for whatever use Dumbledore or the Order required. Xian sat back on a cushion he had transfigured from a soft pad, sipping Justin's honey tea. The panel's voice chattered in his head again and again. You participated in processing a difficult plant to a proficient standard, proficiency plus 100. You participated in processing a difficult plant to a proficient standard, proficiency plus 100. You participated in processing a difficult plant to a proficient standard, proficiency 100. Difficult plant? Xian mused. There really was a difference between processing one plant and another, like the gap between intermediate and advanced transfiguration. He opened the panel and checked his herbology progress. Herbology, beginner, 2700 3000. Processing a Dittany to proficient had given only 10 proficiency points before, but participating in processing a Mimbless Mimbletonia yielded 100. No wonder the plant had played its part during the Battle of Hogwarts. He recalled the original tale. Peeves flew over Harry and the others' heads, throwing Mimbless Mimbletonia pods at the Death Eaters. The attackers' faces were instantly splattered with many green clumps that wriggled like fat caterpillars. The memory made everyone in the greenhouse work faster, hands moving with steady purpose. Chapter 152, The Bloody Baron. Take these canary creams, Little Green. We always have to give some compensation. Now Senior Peast and I are going to the hospital wing to see that idiot. Bruce, I hope he's dead. Senior Leon and Senior Peast left the greenhouse. The five of them pulled on thick robes and walked toward the castle. Merlin, I have to say, Xian, your transfiguration is amazing. Ron made a grand snowman gesture as if he could already do the same, then, in something like a showy jab, gave Malfoy a playful punch. He wore a silly smile. Ron, come on, your transfiguration hasn't even reached apprentice level yet. Harry broke the illusion. Ron's eyes lit up. I will, Harry. Beside him, Justin inspected the canary cream in his hand with wide-eyed curiosity, hardly believing it could turn someone into a canary. Xian examined the biscuit too. He could feel the magic circuits humming through it and reminded himself of his current task, to raise his transfiguration of living creature to proficient. In Hope Cottage, he waved his wand and a beetle blinked into being an owl. It flapped a few times, circled, and then turned back into a beetle. Several thick robes were drying by the fireplace, and the warm, sweet scent of pumpkin drifted through the common room. Xian heard Justin telling Hermione the story of the greenhouse. Hermione gasped in the right places, while Ron and Harry added excited commentary. It was noisy but not unpleasant. From his experiments, Xian could roughly judge his limits. In extreme conditions, he could animate a snowman several meters tall for about 5 minutes. If he didn't need precise control and only sent a simple command, both the size and duration could be increased considerably. The strength of a snowman was a spectrum. Its snow could be loose and powdery, or it could be packed and hard, like years of accumulated ice with a hardness approaching sand and rock. Magic's appeal was perhaps in that malleability, obeying the caster's will, but transfiguration demanded precision and practice. At present, among advanced transfiguration techniques, he really only knew the snowman and the fire salamander spells. Maybe it was time to learn something else: armor transfiguration, stone golem transfiguration. He let his eyes wander to Professor McGonagall's notes on his desk. The fireplace draft gently turned the pages. One heading made him sit up: Pier Totem Locomotor. The description was long and forbidding. Pier Totem Locomotor is classed under Advanced Transfiguration. Its core function is to transform inorganic structural constructs, stone statues, metal armor, etc., into combat-capable units with locomotion. The activated object can perform physical attacks, slashing, charging, while the spell holds. Once its protective shield breaks, it reverts to being stationary. This spell requires extremely precise magical control and continuous guidance to maintain the effect. Reading the professor's careful words, Xian felt the scale of the difficulty. Transfiguring objects into creatures or into animated constructs followed a clear logic. The larger the object, the harder the spell. The more complex the object, the heavier the strain, and the more elaborate the commands, the greater the challenge. To reach the kind of massive, coordinated transfiguration seen in the Battle of Hogwarts, he had a long way to go. He should get to the Transfiguration office, he reminded himself, and walked down the corridor. Snow tinkled from the edge of a stained glass window. Oh, little green! The fat lady's portrait was in one of her gossiping moods. At her side was Madame Violet, ready with a spicy aside. They loved to talk about Professor McGonagall. The fat lady was fond of telling how, in McGonagall's first Transfiguration lesson, she turned a match into a silver needle, and in her second, a mouse into a snuff box. Chien listened, a little wary, then noticed the two portraits staring at him. You know, little green, if you said you were related to the McGonagalls, I'd believe you. Merlin, help us, the fat lady gushed. Oh, don't say that, you'll ruin it, Madame Violet hissed, and the fat lady hurriedly covered her mouth. Ah, it's nothing, she added, too quickly. Chien frowned at her flustered face. She started babbling, grasping for a new line. Ah, the weather, yes, the weather is really nice today. The sun is bright. There's no sun today, Madame Violet corrected. Oh, I mean, at least it's not raining. Yes, it's sleeting, Sir Cadogan interrupted loudly as his portrait passed by. That hateful knight! The three portraits separated, each settling into its habitual banter. Chien sensed something odd about McGonagall lately. She'd been writing and receiving letters constantly. At times a name kept appearing in the corner of his vision. Roland. He felt he'd seen that name somewhere before, but it was a faint, half-remembered trace, like a shadow at the edge of a dream. It made him more curious than confident. A broad face with bright round eyes popped out of the wall ahead. Peeves, mischievous as ever, tugging at the carpet. As Chien started to say something, another head peered from a portrait, gaunt, with pale, hollow eyes and streaked with silvery stains. The Bloody Baron. Peeves froze, then squealed. I'm sorry, my Lord Bloody! Mr. Baron, sir! He cried in the cloying voice he used for an apology he had no intention of meaning. It's all my fault, all my fault. I didn't see you just now. Of course I couldn't see you, you were invisible. Please forgive little Peeves's small prank, sir. But the Baron gave a single motion, and Peeves was in trouble. He began to wail, teetering as he tried to dodge the Baron's sternly silent pursuit. Students watching laughed. It was always a rare sight to see Peeves on the defensive. Normally he was the one dishing out the chaos. Chien watched, a smile tugging at his lips. He had been thinking of calling out the Bloody Baron's name, wondering if he might appear. And now the Baron had shown up on his own. Good luck, he thought, feeling oddly pleased. My lord. Peeves scampered everywhere, finally cornered. I was wrong, my lord. Please forgive Peeves this once. The Bloody Baron watched him until the poltergeist's anguished cries died away. Then, coldly, that young wizard, oh, that little green one. The Baron continued to stare, silent and unforgiving. After a long moment, he left. Peeves, abandoned again, immediately brightened, skipping up the stairs and humming a tune. Oh, a young wizard, not to be trifled with. He loosened the carpet on a stair tread as he went, just in case. Down the corridor, Chien knocked at the Transfiguration office door. A soft, tentative voice answered, Come in, my child. He pushed the door open. Professor McGonagall's wand flicked, and the scattered letters leapt obediently back into their envelopes. Good afternoon, Professor. Chien set his notebook on her desk. He loved recording every insight and scrap of progress. Nothing pleased McGonagall more than a student who kept careful notes. She looked pleased. Outside, December snow fell thickly, and through the window a small, fantastical sight played out. A beetle whooshed and became an owl. The owl flapped into the wind, skimmed the frosted spires with steady wings, clutched a rolled parchment in its talons, and vanished from sight. A moment later, it returned through another window with a soft hoo-hoo-hoo, the letter in its claws dusted white with snow. You practiced advanced transfiguration to a proficient standard, proficiency 300. Chien stroked the owl's feathers, waved his wand, and watched it shrink back into a tiny beetle, which opened translucent wings and settled on the hearthstone. He wrote another note, eyes bright. Transfiguration felt natural to him. You practiced advanced transfiguration to a proficient standard. You practiced advanced transfiguration to a proficient standard. Proficiency plus 300. What Xian did not notice was the way McGonagall's hand holding a letter trembled the more he transfigured. I should have known, she murmured, so faint it might have been only the soft edge of her voice. He had never given her cause for worry. After a cup of the honey and lemon tea she kept in the office, his fatigue ebbed, his body recovered faster than before. Repeated transfigurations of living creature to living creature held steady at the proficient level. Next, he only needed to engrave the runes the way Professor Terra's books described, and his preparations would be complete. He'd even been lucky enough that Senior Leon had accidentally given him a sample to compare. His thoughts wandered to the Weasleys and their canary creams. Apparently, Professor McGonagall had helped inscribe theirs. And to Senior Bruce, who had suffered the consequences. He would do the engraving himself. On his way to the library to find more on ancient runes, Terra's texts felt incomplete. He passed into the corridor and found the fat lady and Mrs. Violet waiting, both looking at him with cautious, expectant faces. It struck him as odd. "Good afternoon, fat lady, Mrs. Violet." The fat lady babbled nervously. "Oh, of course. Little Green, you and Roland Taylor. Oh, little McGonagall's, Roland Taylor." It was the second time he'd heard the name, and it made him stop cold. Puzzling over it, he fumbled in his bag for a letter and found, tucked under one corner, a pressed violet. The sight of it unspooled a memory from the previous winter. He had been bedridden for 3 months then, a body close to death dragged by sheer will through the cold. Human will can be astonishing. It had granted him a stubborn continuation when all else failed. When his panel finally chimed and he could sit up, the person who had come to nurse him was the kind old volunteer, the same small, patient woman who had looked after him now in the memory. Back in McGonagall's office, lamplight smeared itself across the professor's rectangular spectacles and the dying coals in the hearth. The letter in her hand trembled slightly. The ink on the parchment caught the firelight. A quill lay beside Xian's open notebook, annotations half written. Her gaze rested on a framed photograph at the corner of the desk, things she had not expected to understand. Outside, Scottish winds drove harder sleet across the castle towers. She removed her glasses and pinched the bridge of her nose. When she looked up again, rare moisture shone in her usually sharp eyes, and the dancing flame seemed to fracture into tiny, painful sparks in her stare. The desk, a warm island amidst the cold, was otherwise bare except for a small silver cat figurine and a pile of letters. The contents of one letter, neither long nor short, lay heavy as a stone in the shaking air. "I am very sorry, Miss McGonagall. The orphanage will not take in so gravely ill a child. It does not suit the gentleman's interests. For 3 months he behaved so well. God be thanked, he lived. Madam, I do not mean to press, but he is a very obedient child. If you have no intention of adopting him, please do not send him back to the orphanage. I am helpless. I can only send £50 and a cotton coat. Please accept them. £5 would buy a ticket to St. Catherine's Dock. Please give him 5 of the pounds for that." The child told my mother that with a warm coat and £5 he could survive. I am but poor, humble, and plain, but when my soul goes out through the grave, my heart will be lighter than a feather. May God deliver everything into his hands. McGonagall folded the letter slowly, the lines at her mouth hardening with a sorrow and responsibility that had nowhere easy to go. Chapter 154, A Letter from London. December's cold always made wizards linger by the fire. Xian sat at a table near the hearth, silently gathering the many books he'd spread out, and before Madame Pince could chase him off with her feather duster, he filled out the crumpled loan slip. With a casual flick of his wand, the volumes, runes, detailed explanation of the Elder Futhark, and annotations on the Anglo-Saxon Futhork stacked themselves and followed him out of the library. He straightened a few nearby shelves on his way. It was only a small help. The Hogwarts library was vast, thousands of stacks and hundreds of winding paths, and even Madame Pince couldn't tidy it alone in an evening. No wonder it shut at 8. "Goodbye, Madame Pince," he murmured. A little booklet hovered above his head as he left. Xian habitually clipped odd details from the history of magic. With a flash of imagination, those scraps often yielded useful magical insights. For example, Alberta Twycross, a witch, had entered the All England Wizarding Dueling Championship in 1430 at age 39 and defeated the popular Samson Wiblin with a blasting curse to win the title. Before Twycross and another duelist who favored disarming charms, wizards tended to rely on elaborate, time-consuming spells, conjuring a small mountain out of nowhere, for instance. Their successes helped people realize that simpler spells could be devastatingly effective, a shift that eventually produced many of the modern standardized charms. Madame Pince adored those little anecdotes, and with her erudition she supplied even more interesting context. On Halloween, she had presented Xian with a handsomely wrapped copy of Studies in Modern Witchcraft Development, full of her marginalia. They spoke little, but their annotations read like letters, scholars trading notes across time. He rode his broom back to Ravenclaw Tower, scarf fluttering in the wind. A magical lantern burned in his window as it always did. Michael, as usual, rushed to meet him and peered at the broom with undisguised envy. He discovered Xian's Nimbus 2000 and sometimes borrowed it to admire. Xian allowed it occasionally, but Michael still grinned and said, "Oh, Xian, not many people know this, but this is important. You should be the only one to use it." Outside, snow fell thickly, muffling the castle until it seemed carved from night. Xian set the heavy rune books aside and noticed a plate of biscuits embroidered with magical script arrays. Advanced Transfiguration was involved, and he'd never quite gotten the enchantments right. "Biscuits?" he offered. Michael moved over. "Xian, really, don't keep these from me. I won't feel so good otherwise." Xian made no objection, so Michael ate one casually and very quickly sprouted wings and a face that sprouted fur. Anthony, who had just come in, had to wrestle him back from the window where he was trying to fly. Xian, taking a slow breath, wrote on the nearest scrap of parchment, "Failed owl biscuits. Reason for failure. Rune array misalignment. Effect, partial transformation into an owl. Partial loss of sanity." Michael's head lolled against the window pane. "Help me," he whimpered. Xian grabbed his left arm. Anthony took his right. "Stop yelling," Xian said. "Eat another one, and you'll at least fall to your doom properly next time." Anthony hauled him back into the room and, amused, offered, "Kettleridge was the first wizard to discover the properties of gillywater. Now he's on a chocolate frog card. Maybe you'll be the first wizard to turn into an owl and die foolishly. I'll line up to buy your card." Anthony left with a chuckle, but before he went, he bent close to Xian and added quietly, "I don't know what this biscuit actually does, but failed products can be fun, like prank candies." The remark lingered as Michael bolted out, cheeks flushed, and the tower resumed its peace. Xian concentrated on the biscuit's failure. He could sense where the magic had frayed. Runic control. He made notes to ask Professor Terra about the inscriptions on Monday. Late that night, an owl flew in from very far away and crashed with a thud against Xian's window. He hurried to bring it inside. The bird was spirited, silver-white wings dusted with snow. He set fire to the tip of his wand, and 2 little fire salamanders gathered to warm it. As the snow on the owl's feathers melted, he reached into the parcel it carried and pulled out a thick bundle of clothes, tattered, patched, resewn many times. Xian's chest tightened. The garments reminded him of the kindly old woman, Milan Taylor. There was nothing else in the package, but tucked into the hem of a cuff, he found £5 and a folded letter. "Whether your big event comes or not, child, you once said £5 was enough to live on. Please keep these £5, and may you always have the courage of £5. On the back was the sending address. The street named there, where the London Orphanage stood, still bore piles of uncleared trash bags. A woman with weathered skin sat by a window in that description, her face alternating between a slack, resigned sadness and a small tightening of worry. The children had grown used to abandonment, but habit did not erase sorrow. "For God's sake," she murmured to herself. Back in Ravenclaw Tower, the owl settled contentedly beside Xian and the salamanders, playing with them as if it had never flown a long journey. Xian knew when he visited Hope Cottage tomorrow he would have to wait a little longer. He could already hear, in his imagination, the sharp rebuke Mr. Owl would deliver. "No, you, enter, you fickle young wizard." The wind from London howled, carrying with it something like promise. Hope stirred and spread, sudden and stubborn as grass seed under snow in a greenhouse. Chapter 155, Love Saves the Day. It was a clear Thursday. Professor McGonagall hadn't shown up at Hogwarts all day. She had rearranged the timetable with Professor Snape, and the result was a chorus of miserable wails from a group of young wizards missing Transfiguration. Snape himself was in no better mood. After some Slytherins had a particularly trying time, he docked 10 points from Gryffindor because Harry had misplaced an ingredient. Harry and Ron were still grumbling when they reached Hope Cottage. "I think he's just taking advantage of Professor McGonagall's absence. Merlin's beard, I don't even know who to complain to. Prefect?" Percy would say, "Why does Professor Snape only punish you? Mind your own business." Their complaints faded when they saw Chien waiting by the entrance, an unusual sight. An owl, perched there, raised its voice in a shrill, officious screech. "No, you may not enter. Young wizard, fickle young wizard." Harry and Ron exchanged a look and, despite themselves, started to stifle laughter. Hermione, who had come along, watched them with a frown. After the owl barked its insults a few more times, even the boys fell silent and stepped back. "Young wizard, stupid young wizard, blockhead, dimwit, as foolish as a Gryffindor. Unless you now tell a Gryffindor folly, otherwise just wait." Justin arrived with a tray of biscuits and became an instant savior. He peered at the lineup, smiled, and adopted an exaggerated tone. "If Godric Gryffindor were still alive," he announced, "he would be the giant squid in the Great Lake." The owl flapped its wings and finally allowed them inside. Once indoors, Chien reviewed his notes on ancient runes, packed his things, and headed for the dungeons to brew his potion. In the corridor, the Weasleys intercepted him. "What biscuits did you bring?" Fred asked cheerfully. "I bet they're brilliant." "You're the great green," George added, more excited than usual. "If Weasley's Wizard Wheezes takes off, we'll have to give you some stock." Fred blinked dramatically. "A little bit. 2%, of course. What do you think?" George launched into his usual stream of chatter. Chien threaded around them. Once the twins started talking, you never knew when they'd stop. "You must be off to Professor Snape to engrave magic script, right, Fred?" George suddenly exclaimed as if remembering something. "Oh, Merlin's beard, we don't know advanced transfiguration, so..." Fred darted forward and grabbed Chien. "You have to change." George gave Chien an ingratiating pat. Chien often wondered why the twins, brilliant in practical alchemy, knew little advanced transfiguration. He gave his wand a casual flick. A small jar of beetles popped open, and in moments the beetles swarmed together and transformed into an owl. Fred's eyes went wide. Both twins stared as if they'd hit gold. "Great green," Fred breathed. The brothers bowed in unison, their delight obvious. On the way to the dungeons, using one of their many tricks, they ended up with some half-minted owl biscuits from CN. Then they peered at him with a peculiar look. "If you need advanced transfiguration knowledge for ancient runes," Fred began. "Why don't you ask us?" George finished. "We got an O in ancient runes, naturally good at it." They tossed a book at Chien and then disappeared into the secret passage behind a portrait. The book's title read 100 Ways to Prank Ron. Chien blinked, mildly stunned. "Wrong," he muttered. The twins popped back out and with sleight of hand switched the books. Chien opened the new one, Ancient Runes Engraving Techniques. As he read, his face brightened. The twins, it seemed, were not only talented tricksters, but had a surprisingly sharp grasp of ancient runes. This was exactly what he needed. His steps were lighter as he went down into the dungeons, and that unexpected ease drew a dark look from Snape as Chien passed. Time passed in a flurry of coming and going owls. When Chien finally emerged from the dungeons, Sir Cadogan was waiting outside. Unlike his usual boisterous self, the knight stood in silence and watched Chien leave, then mounted his pony in a huff. That afternoon, a sudden downpour began. Rain hammered down from the sky in sheets, like heaps of gravel tossed from a great height, the sound building into a constant roar. The wet threads of rain darkened the roads around the castle. Lightning flashed, and the heavens seemed to shudder. Amid the storm, Sir Cadogan charged back into the dungeons, shouting, "Don't you understand? Getting used to a desperate situation is 10,000 times worse than the desperate situation itself." He rushed in as he had on that night long ago. "Oh, my sir, he is always willing to sacrifice himself for others," someone remarked in a flurry of anxious voices. Lady Violet was at a loss for words for a moment. "Well, Violet, I don't actually think this is the right thing to do," the fat lady muttered, stamping her foot in annoyance. No one knew exactly what had happened in the dungeons. When Sir Cadogan finally crawled back out, bruised and battered, he looked toward the entrance with a face that plainly said, "It was worth it." Professor Snape's black robes billowed though no wind blew, his presence like a thundercloud rolling through the corridor. He strode to the circular, spacious headmaster's office, where silver trinkets glittered and a blackened kettle gurgled and bubbled. Albus Dumbledore sat behind his large oak desk, his half-moon spectacles perched low on his nose. Over the rims of his glasses, his sapphire eyes watched the storm outside. "Ah, Principal Dilys Derwent," he said softly, gazing out at the rain. "The tragic and wonderful thing about this world is that it gives us no absolute truths, and yet there is still so much love. Absurdity reigns, and love saves the day." Chapter 156, Owl Biscuits. At the entrance to the Hogwarts headmaster's office, after Professor Snape obtained the document he needed, he slipped away and vanished into the night outside the castle. Meanwhile, on a litter-strewn street in the Croydon district, Minerva McGonagall stood before the worn door of a dilapidated Victorian semi in the poorer southern suburbs. She clutched a yellowed letter in her hand and studied the sagging floorboards and single-pane windows, their frames warped by age. Passers-by scarcely glanced at her. She could watch the house in private, letter creased in her trembling fingers. The writing showed through the paper, where her knuckles were white from holding it so tight. "Dear Madam, when I first learned of this news, I knew that my long years of wandering had finally come to an end. Madam, forgive my lack of composure. I wept all night. If you see this, dear Madam, forgive his obtuseness. Please be patient, and more patient." What she didn't know was that she wasn't the only witch or wizard on that street. Christmas was approaching, and She-En had been busy making owl biscuits. The moment the biscuits appeared, everyone in Hope Cottage was interested. Strange things tended to happen when She-En worked. Sometimes a biscuit would suddenly turn into a live owl, which everyone found delightfully novel. At first, they assumed it was a transfiguration trick, until they overheard two of the Weasleys in the corridor discussing stock agreements with She-En. Only then did it dawn on them that this was something else entirely. The Weasleys, after all, had a reputation for odd inventions. "She-En, what is this?" Justin peered over curiously. "Owl biscuits," She-En replied. Seeing Justin's puzzled look, he added quietly, "They're biscuits that can turn a wizard into an owl." "Merlin," Justin blinked. After She-En nodded, he picked one up and turned it over, squinting to see if any charm markings betrayed the magic. Hermione hurried over and inspected a biscuit too. "Alchemy?" she guessed. She-En nodded. Harry and Ron exchanged bewildered looks. "Alchemy? Wasn't that for 6th years?" "I bet She-En will be the next Percy. No, 10, 5, even 3 times better than Percy," Ron declared confidently. Harry felt that, aside from the fame attached to his name, he often came up short beside his friends. For a moment, he felt a little inferior. "Just passed the test," he muttered. She-En remembered how eager the Weasleys had been to try the biscuits. The first trial went surprisingly well. The two of them ended up clinging to a pine tree and were later retrieved by She-En using a controlled snowman. They complained of being frightened by the giant snowman once they came round, but otherwise, the whole episode was smooth. "Be careful, one at a time," She-En warned. "You temporarily lose your reason when you turn into an owl." The loss of reason was something She-En had read about, rather like the stories about enchanted flying creatures in a book on Quidditch oddities. Wizards who turned themselves into bats thought it clever because bats could fly freely, but with a bat's brain, they kept forgetting where they were going and drifted endlessly. Magic, She-En thought, was humbling in that way. When you think you've discovered something new, you find predecessors had already recorded it. The owl biscuits had to be used with care, but She-En had a peculiar intuition. He hypothesized that a wizard possessed a kind of duplicate body. If a wizard's self transformed into a living creature and aligned correctly with that duplicate, the transfiguration would be easier and sanity preserved. If Professor McGonagall took an owl biscuit, would she lose her mind? That was an open question. The solution, he suspected, was to learn advanced transfiguration, to train the self to transform into a living creature. Victor Crumb's example, he had become something like a shark's head, yet retained his reason, seemed to show the path was possible. Back at Hope Cottage, everyone sat obediently, waiting for the debut of this extraordinary innovation. "All right, I'll go first," Justin volunteered, meeting the group's mixture of excitement and anxiety. He bit a biscuit. His expression flickered, then he finished it as if nothing had happened. "How was it?" Chien asked. "Of course it's great," Justin answered at once. "Tell the truth," someone demanded. "It's absolutely awful." Justin's face contorted. He had never eaten anything so bad. No sooner had he spoken than he transformed into an owl and stretched his wings. Chien had discovered the problem. His biscuits worked, but they tasted terrible. One by one, the young witches and wizards took a bite. Their faces soured, they swallowed despite the flavor, and then changed into owls. Before Chien set off to find Professor Terra, he realized the single greatest shortcoming in his training. None of the textbooks he had studied taught cooking. As he rifled through his books in search of culinary guidance, Justin hovered nearby. When Chien borrowed some magical cookery books from the library, Justin sighed at his side. When Chien began flipping through Conjure a Feast, Justin's voice drifted through, mingled with the sound of falling snow outside. "Mother says half of a person's life should be spent among friends. Chien, can I help a little?" His eyes shone with earnest goodwill. Hours passed quickly, and when the owl biscuits were finally baked in the Hogwarts kitchens, Justin could not hide the smile that tugged at his mouth. "Flour, sugar, eggs, baking powder, butter, milk. The ratios are," he recited, and Chien wrote everything down verbatim. At last, the owl biscuits were truly finished. Chien waved his wand, and the biscuits flew into Justin's waiting hands. "See you tonight," he said, and carried samples toward the alchemy office. The Howler and the Owl biscuits were his first practical projects in alchemy. He walked briskly down the corridor. Ever since the letter from London had arrived, he kept himself busier than ever, so he wouldn't have time to dwell on things, on the dizzying mixture of excitement, anticipation, unease. He often saw, in his mind, the professor's gentle blue eyes, calm and clear as a mountain lake. Whether in his past life or this one, Professor McGonagall was old enough to be his grandmother, and he still didn't know how he should face what was coming. Winter wind rushed past his shoulders, carrying the present into the future. Above the gust, the stars glittered, deep and unknowable. Chapter 157, Exchange Meeting. The alchemy classroom was full of self-moving instruments. Chien peered through the window and saw Professor Terra holding a biscuit while lecturing the 6th and 7th year wizards. He had arrived early. "A canary biscuit," Professor Terra was saying. "Of course, some of you will think of Babbity Rabbity from the tales of Beetle the Bard, the story where she transformed into a long-bearded rabbit, hid in a tree stump, and used magic to intimidate the king. You might assume that perfect human transfiguration driven by alchemy must exist. I regret to inform you the alchemy community long ago denied that. Even if the story were true, Babbity Rabbity would at best be a rare animagus. The idea that an animagus can cast magic? Ha! That's less likely than you producing an alchemical creation that satisfies me on the first try. Let me warn you, this is what happens to an overconfident alchemist who tries to turn himself into an owl to truly understand flight. 100 years later, he's trapped between two states, neither wizard nor bird, and he dies of old age on a cliff." Professor Terra's reference to the tales of Beetle the Bard, a bedtime story beloved in the wizarding world, led into the real issue, the dream of perfect human transfiguration. It was a pursuit the transfiguration community had abandoned and the alchemy community had picked up. Historically, several animagi believed that after transfiguration, a wizard naturally lost the ability to perform magic. Alchemists, however, were the sort who chased the harder questions. After a century of study, they had nothing definitive. They couldn't allow a wizard to retain clear self-awareness after complete transfiguration, nor could they allow a wizard to cast magic in such a form. So they denied perfect transfiguration, officially. Chien listened quietly by the door. The lack of a confirmed method didn't mean it was impossible. He trusted his intuition more than history. More importantly, his own self to living creature Transfiguration had recently reached apprentice level. A 5-foot runes essay and a proper eternal ink. Last class before Christmas? I want to see these, Professor Terra concluded. When she finished, the alchemy office door opened automatically, and the students filed out, speaking only in whispers and grumbles down the corridor. What set her off this time? 2 weeks' worth of homework in 1 week? Merlin's beard. Can anyone at Hogwarts actually produce an alchemical creation in a week? Xian remembered the professor had asked him for one every 5 days. He wondered if it had anything to do with him. He stepped in when the professor called. "Come in, Mr. Green. I suppose you heard my example of perfect transfiguration. For wizards who only reach the threshold of alchemy, that's an undeniable fact. A healthy dose of reverence will at least prevent irreparable consequences, but for talented wizards, facts can be overturned." Her silver hair glittered at the words, and she asked, "Let me see your howler and your other alchemy assignment." Xian handed over the howler first. The twins' voices erupted from inside. "Dear Professor Terra." He quickly shut off the howler's magic circuit. He wasn't used to uproarious displays. The Weasleys loved them. Professor Terra nodded approvingly. "Good, very good," she said. In material choice, rune engraving, and the final control, it was a qualified alchemical assignment, several levels above many senior students who couldn't even properly use the Scarpin revealing charm or distinguish runes. Such students were too often chasing quick profit or chasing absurd, whimsical ideas. Professor Terra snapped her fingers. The parchments on the desk transformed into owls and flew off. Students who had just reached the Great Hall were still catching their breath when papers whacked them on the head. "An essay on the Scarpin revealing charm," someone shouted. "Merlin's beard," another answered. Several cauldrons were already set up in the alchemy classroom. Professor Terra examined Xian's remaining alchemical creation, the owl-shaped biscuits, with an increasingly expectant look. The biscuits Xian had made vanished when she reached for them. Moments later, they were in her hand. Advanced transfiguration involving mutual conversion of living creatures, meticulously carved rune circuits, stable and continuous despite being nascent. "The trigger spell is just right," she murmured, her expression shifting rapidly. "Is this food magic?" She stood and began to pace, a nervous excitement making her hands tremble and her face seemed slightly unfocused, as if she herself were under a minor charm. Her voice dropped until it was barely audible, and Xian couldn't tell how highly she rated his work. He felt a prickle of nerves in turn. The Weasleys might have sung his praises, but that didn't mean much. Professor Terra had seen students from many magic schools, and the alchemical standards she'd encountered were high. There was Nicholas Flamel, after all, the maker of the Philosopher's Stone, and alchemists who could produce portkeys, night buses, vanishing cabinets, and undetectable extension charms. Compared to them, what did his apprentice-level work mean? Xian opened his panel and checked his progress. Unlocked. Owl biscuits, apprentice level. 3 apprentice-level alchemical creations. Unlocking the apprentice-level title in alchemy requires completing 3. The Howler had succeeded on the first try. He'd spent the rest of his time perfecting the owl biscuits, so he hadn't had a chance to unlock the domain title yet. Oh, very good. I mean, extremely good. Few people achieve such high results in both alchemy and transfiguration, Professor Terra said, attempting to subdue her excitement with the decorum of her position. She had just sent several brief, enchanted letters out in a demonstration, short and tightly controlled. The messages read simply, "For the next Urada International Alchemy Congress, I will bring my students, and I hope you all will too." Chapter 158, The Approaching Christmas. These were formidable challenges. As Nicholas Flamel's leading alchemist, Professor Terra's accomplishments would leave a mark on the history of alchemy. She had held tenured positions at 5 different magical schools. If not for her age, she would have been on the Elder Council of the International Alchemy Congress. Yet despite her fame, she could never find suitable students. That was why she traveled between schools. Without students, there was no inheritance, and inheritance was a priority in the alchemical world. This wasn't about lofty ideals, it was about practicality. Every great alchemist develops a personal style. Alchemical knowledge is abstruse, full of arcane references and symbols. A single celebrated work often requires volumes of commentary. If a lineage stopped, a whole branch of alchemy could die with it. In a world where individual wizards drive most breakthroughs, that mattered all the more. In the alchemy office, Professor Terra looked at Xi-En with bright, intent eyes. She should have come to Hogwarts long ago. Not bad. Her expression cleared, and her voice came through plain and steady. All right, child. Incredible results. She sounded a little flustered. From now on, your time will belong to alchemy. Finish reading these books over the Christmas holidays and present a paper on alchemical rituals. Her tone was both strict and expectant. With a flick of her hand, a stack of books, hidden in the depths of the classroom, flew out. Alchemy was ritual magic. Unlike the precision of potions, alchemical rituals varied, but almost all alchemists agreed on one rule. An alchemist could not rely on two rituals at once. Once an apprentice adopted one ritual, it became very hard to switch. He had entered a school of thought. Xian left the classroom with a pile of Professor Terra's personal annotations. He didn't yet know that alchemy functioned like a master-apprentice system. Those annotated techniques were essentially master signatures. Use the same exclusive methods and everyone would know whose lineage you followed. By the time he reached the corridor, the rain had eased. Xian walked lightly, realizing his talent was rare even among alchemists. The first time he rode a flying broomstick, he'd been able to sense the flow of magic in alchemical constructs and deconstruct their sigils, much like a potions master can independently judge heat, stirring, and timing. This was a branch-specific aptitude, a talent for the craft. Great Green, how did it go? Did Professor Terra say? Fred blurted, curiosity tugging at him as always. The corridor revived the Weasley twins, and Xian had grown used to their constant energy. No, Xian paused for a moment. She only said, incredible results. Ah, Fred groaned. Then those awful cookies we ate. George began, then both twins' faces changed as realization hit. Whatever they'd just hinted at, they hadn't meant to say. They vanished in a flash. Xian sighed. If the twins ever opened a shop, he'd happily be their first investor. Their schemes were practically a sure thing. There was still a week until Christmas. Suddenly, the sky cleared to a brilliant, pale white, and one morning the muddy grounds were dusted in sparkling frost. The castle bustled with holiday cheer. Professor Flitwick had already wrapped his charms classroom in lights that turned into real, fluttering fairy lights. In the corridor outside the Great Hall, a massive fir blocked the way. Two large boots stuck out from beneath it, and loud huffing revealed the culprit, Hagrid. Hey, Hagrid, need any help? Ron asked, poking his head through the branches. No, I can manage. Thank you, Ron. Hagrid grunted, then dragged the tree away to be set up as the Great Hall's Christmas tree. Everyone was starting to breathe easier at the thought of the holidays. Hope Cottage seemed to grow warmer as well. Harry sat on a stool, sipping oat milk and watching steam curl from the mug. This room felt full of promise. Xian, can I test my spell proficiency? He asked. Xian set down the howler he'd just finished. He was a little way from reaching apprentice. It was almost dinner time. By common agreement, there was some downtime before and after meals. They weren't study maniacs. Well, not entirely. Go on, Harry, Justin teased. Okay. Harry swallowed and raised his wand. Wingardium Leviosa. A wooden plank floated up. Xian flicked his wand and a small translucent sheet hovered toward Harry's face, displaying an assessment. Harry, levitation charm, aguamenti, beginner. That's really good. Justin was first to cheer. A week ahead of me, about the same as you, Hermione. Hermione lifted her chin, barely passing. Justin smiled and checked his own sheet. A week and a half from beginner to proficient. You've got strong spell talent. Harry felt his head swim from the praise, made more satisfying when Hermione and Neville both nodded. Besides flying, he now had another thing he could be proud of. Maybe people would say, oh, Potter, he's really good at spells, instead of whatever else they'd said before. Ron wandered over, a little downcast. His spell proficiency lagged, but then brightened when he saw his transfiguration listed as beginner. His hard work was paying off. He hadn't expected to see progress so clearly. He really loved it here. Hope Cottage always felt full of hope, though perhaps only Justin knew why in detail. When a group's members are at similar levels, friction and bias are almost inevitable. But the people at Hope Cottage weren't like that. More than anything, their harmony and energy came from Shien. He had brought together a genuinely good group of young wizards. Chapter 159, The Show. The good news was that Shien had started preparing Christmas gifts. The bad news was that he hadn't seen Professor McGonagall for 2 days, and Professor Snape was nowhere to be found either. He assumed McGonagall was tied up with whatever she was investigating, but Snape's absence bothered him more. He went down to the dungeons as arranged, and for the first time the agreed meeting place was empty. Where had the potions master gone? Only Sir Cadogan remained outside the dungeons, attempting to ride a toy pony, his face bandaged and bruised in places. Shien had no idea when he'd been hurt. The portrait knight caught sight of him and launched into a triumphant monologue. "Oh, little Green, how exciting. Surely good news will come this Christmas, won't it? I once persuaded a foolish fellow to repent in front of Gryffindor Tower. Ha! At least he no longer has to go to Ravenclaw Tower." Sir Cadogan marched off, chest puffed out. Only the fat lady and Lady Violet, safely inside their frames, understood what he was blathering about. Outside, the weather boiled with lightning and storm, and one ugly word, mudblood, had spoiled whatever plan those two wizards had been hatching. The knight, furious as he had been the night before, thundered into the dungeons and roared until a numb silence stirred awake. Waiting outside Gryffindor Tower, apologizing and pleading, may have been the bravest thing that numb person had ever done. The fat lady bit into an apple and, sulking, hooked out a foot to trip the knight as he passed. "It's a shame," she grumbled. How could he be compared to little McGonagall?" Lady Violet, equally indignant, could only reply, "Don't fret, my lady. Remember, he once had the knight's recognition." Meanwhile, Minerva McGonagall's investigation into the orphaned Muggleborns revealed a bureaucratic tangle. The Ministry of Magic operated like a makeshift patchwork when dealing with Muggle affairs, especially orphans born in the Muggle world. Before the wizarding authorities were aware, these children were typically absorbed into the Muggle social system. Even after discovery, that system often continued to manage them. The ministry's role was largely to uphold the international statute of secrecy. If a witch or wizard was lucky, a relative in the wizarding world would be found. If unlucky, like young Tom, Hogwarts was the safest place for them. Adoption of a Muggle orphan by a wizard was almost unheard of. Holyfoss Orphanage sat under a thin, dirty blanket of snow. McGonagall's stern, searching eyes made the dean almost sweat. The professor's green robes and formidable presence filled the room, as if she were reading memories aloud. "You mean this takes a long time?" the dean asked, trembling. McGonagall felt the unease of delay keenly. "Of course we would be pleased to have him leave with you today, madam," she said, "but the application, probationary period, and final adoption decree will take at least a month." She left without waiting for bureaucratic approvals. If the ministry refused to act, a few well-placed Confundus charms would, in her mind, be a perfectly reasonable solution. After the woman in green departed, the small fire in the orphanage's hearth flared higher. The children, faces pinched from the cold, circled the flames and began to chatter excitedly. "It's my Christmas wish," a little girl squealed. Outside, the dean scoffed and tried to regain composure, unaware that a gloomy, hook-nosed man had lingered too close to her thoughts. He had, inexplicably, seen things he shouldn't have, memories that now left the dean bewildered. 2 visitors had come and gone. She stood frozen, wondering if she had imagined it all. By the fireplace, the air of gloom was suddenly broken by a new, surprising figure. A white-bearded man in long robes who looked, to the children's delight, like a wizardly Santa Claus. The stale, disinfectant smell of the orphanage seemed to lift for a moment. "Can you grant our Christmas wishes?" he asked with a kindly smile. A little boy stepped forward, eyes bright. I want some charcoal," he said shyly. "Of course," the white-bearded man replied. "That's a fine Christmas wish. It should be granted." As if by magic, piles of charcoal began to appear around the hearth. The children erupted in delighted shouts. The old man's smile warmed, and his deep blue eyes drifted off into the distance, curious and pleased. After decades of routine, he hadn't seen anything so lively in a long while. Back at Hogwarts, The week before Christmas made the school noisier and more animated by the day. Rumors of Headmaster Dumbledore's generosity, absurd tales that he had bought hundreds of barrels of spiced mead from Madame Rosmerta, spread like wildfire. Some teachers, noticing the distracted students, gave up trying to keep them strictly to lessons. Professor Flitwick, for example, let his class play games one Wednesday and spent most of the time talking with Chien about the finer points of spell theory. All of Hope Cottage was welcome to listen in. Flitwick watched the students' progress with a pleased, squinting smile. Other professors were less indulgent. Professor Binns, untroubled by death or holidays, trudged robotically through his lecture notes on eccentric personalities. The students joked that if even death hadn't stopped him from teaching, Christmas certainly wouldn't. That afternoon in the Great Hall, the mead rumors swirled again. Chien, preoccupied with practicing howler making and wondering about his alchemical talents, paid little attention. Ron, overhearing the talk of spiced mead, flushed with competitive bravado. "I can drink 5 cups," he declared, cheeks going pink. Leaving Hope Cottage later, Ron found that a small fib felt surprisingly good, an indulgent sliver of self-confidence, as if he'd just won at wizard chess. Hermione only ever sulks when she loses at chess and retreats with her books. Chien handled loss differently. When he lost a game, he would say gently, "Ron, you're really good at this," and the compliment made Ron beam. There's one more chapter a little later. Dear readers can read it tomorrow morning. Chapter 160, Alchemy Talent Sheet. And planned to finish reading the 5 books he had with him. They were The Choice and Enlightenment of Alchemical Materials, Ether and the Secret Laws of Combination, The Power of Ancient Runes in Alchemy, Runes Engraving and Container Construction, and in-depth analysis of alchemical rituals. Together, they covered materials, combinations, rune symbols, rune engraving, and most importantly, rituals. The more he read, the more Chien felt that wizards were convincing themselves. For example, The Choice and Enlightenment of Alchemical Materials claimed that adding dragon blood could make alchemical creations purer and more stable. But later in the same book, it was stated that dragon blood could also ruin a creation's purity, decomposing its components and corrupting it with the dragon's destructive essence. How, then, should dragon blood be used? Headmaster Dumbledore listed 12 uses for dragon blood. Each use carried conflicting implications, and often multiple, entirely different methods were presented side by side. Chien began to suspect that whether dragon blood worked depended largely on what the wizard intended it to do. Everything in alchemy served the wizard. The more the wizard believed in the power of alchemy, the more power it could grant. Rituals were the bridge between intention and effect. The ambiguity of alchemy became inevitable. It was essentially an art, not a strict science. It relied on the wizard's fluctuating mental state, symbolic associations that couldn't be pinned down, and personal magical intuition. 2 wizards using the same knowledge and tools and following the same instructions could produce wildly different results because belief could not be standardized or replicated. After recording his thoughts, heavy snow began falling outside Hope Cottage. The snow around Hogwarts had piled thick and layered. It fell soft, and after days of accumulation, became hard and cold beneath a still soft surface that could be rolled into snowballs. Inside Hope Cottage, Justin was making biscuits with a portable oven nearby, while Chien quietly engraved rune symbols. The seating was arranged to suit study. Chien in the center, Justin on his left, Hermione on his right. Neville sat at the very front, tending the garden of plants. Because there were so many, they filled the podium area, stacked on plant stands of varying heights. Behind them were Harry and Ron, one inclined to Transfiguration, the other to spells. Chien had transfigured the seats into a semi-enclosed space, so privacy wasn't an issue. The carving knife grew slightly hot, and Chien realized he had finished crafting a howler. You have practiced howler creation to the standard of a proficient. Proficiency plus 10. A new alchemy domain title has been unlocked. Please check. A new wizard talent has been unlocked. Please check. Chien decided to check the domain title first. The panel read, Title, Novice Alchemist. Slightly increases perception of alchemical magic. Slightly enhances alchemical talent. He held his breath and checked the talent. Wizard Chien, Alchemy Talent Gold. Note, normal wizards are green. Creation and reform, exploration and the unknown. You are an irreplaceable pathfinder in the field of alchemy. If you realize your talent, you will undoubtedly leave a legacy for alchemists to follow. Chien stared. Rival Nicolas Flamel? The thought stunned him. Suddenly, the connection between flying and alchemy made sense. If his flying talent was gold, his alchemy talent wouldn't be weak. After all, flying broomcraft were a kind of alchemical creation. He remembered that the proficiency requirement in the flying domain had been incredibly low, only 30 points to advance from apprentice to entry level. If flying is an offshoot of alchemy, that fit, so his true gifts might be alchemy and the dark arts. As he mused, the panel gave its loudest ding yet. A new line of text appeared beneath the gold alchemy talent. You have unlocked 3 legendary talents and successfully expanded the boundaries of legend. A talent cap has been raised. New wizard talent, Red 1, requires unlocking a legendary title in any magic domain. He had assumed legendary was the cap, but there was more. The vastness of magic, he realized, meant there was always another path to walk. Expert corresponded to adult wizards, master to Hogwarts professors, legend to figures like Headmaster Dumbledore and Lord Voldemort. Above legend, what would that be? The thought inflamed his passion for magic. A sizzle from the oven interrupted his reverie. Justin's biscuits were fresh. Seeing them, Chien felt how much farther he had to go in blending transfiguration with alchemy. If he could make owl biscuits, then creating giant bear biscuits, beetle biscuits, or a Lion King biscuit seemed feasible. The difficulty lay only in how well he understood those animals. The path of alchemy and transfiguration was long. He needed first to master self-to-creature transfiguration, to grow wings or morph his head into a shark's to dive. Lord Voldemort's flying stance, turning into a cloud of black smoke, floated through his mind. Was that a special transfiguration? He waved his wand. You have practiced advanced transfiguration to the standard of a proficient. Proficiency plus 30. The elm bookshelf trembled, and the wooden boards obeyed some silent command, spitting out a dark green-covered notebook. Chien sighed. Since his transfiguration had reached expert and passed 100,000 proficiency points, the returns from low-standard practice had diminished. It was like when he first learned nonverbal spells, he was being pushed to explore deeper layers. He opened the dark green notebook. It contained Professor McGonagall's notes on self-transfiguration, interspersed with animagus techniques. As he read, the words from the panel echoed in his mind: creation and reform, exploration and the unknown, an irreplaceable pathfinder in the field of alchemy. At the same time, words formed in Professor Terra's notebook. You will eventually feel, child, why we study alchemy. I write here to remind you, and myself, that we must always look at things with different eyes. We explore the mysteries of alchemy because we are wizards, and wizards are full of creativity and passion. We have the magic to change the world. Why should we be content to remain mediocre and stand still? This is my answer, and perhaps it will be yours too. To all dear readers, 5 chapters will be released as usual at 10:30 p.m.